And I think that, there'll be some people have a curiosity about the Jewish view, a fascination with the topic of afterlife or reincarnation and all of those sorts of concepts. Some of us are here because of recent bereavement. We need the tools or perspective to deal with loss. Where is he or she now? Does he or she still care about me? Do I still have a relationship with him or her? Some people are here because they're facing life-threatening illnesses. They need to face their own mortality. And for some, there's a fear of death and the need to prepare for the eventuality. So over the next 6 weeks, we'll be covering the topic from 3 perspectives. Death poses some philosophical and theological issues. Is there a purpose to death? What happens to the soul? Is there such a thing as heaven and hell? Does Judaism believe in reincarnation? So those are the philosophical and theological issues. And then we have to contend with sometimes paralyzing emotional issues that death poses. Facing one's own mortality is very scary and can be a source of tremendous anxiety. And then, of course, there are the open and the raw wounds that are left in the wake of the loss of a loved one. The heart is torn, the mind has no answers. How and when do we recover from the devastating blow that is the loss of somebody who we loved very, very much and who loved us very, very much? And finally, there are some practical issues. How do I prepare for death, whether my own or that of someone near and dear, both practically and spiritually? What are the Jewish funeral and mourning traditions and practices, and what are their significance? What are the best ways to memorialize somebody who's passed away? What should or shouldn't I say to my friend who's grieving? To give you a better understanding of what's covered in this course, I want to give you a course overview for the next 6 weeks. So tonight's lesson number 1, is absolutely foundational. Tonight we're going to be looking at understanding death and the eternality of the soul and providing a perspective for overcoming the fear of death. Next week, we're going to talk about taking leave. What happens when the soul leaves the body? In week 3, we're going to look at the grieving process and the significance of the various mourning customs. In lesson 4, we're going to look at some of the Jewish concepts of heaven and hell, just so that we know where we're going, because I guess it's important to know your destination. In lesson number 5, we're going to come to the very fascinating subject of the Jewish idea of reincarnation. And in lesson 6, we're going to talk about how death actually informs life. That's our overview for the next 6 weeks. But there are 2 questions that I wanted to raise and I want to try and answer before we can actually even begin on our journey. And I suppose the first one is, why are we devoting so much time to the morbid topic of death when Judaism is so much about life? I mean, there must, after all, be better and happier things for us to be studying tonight rather than this morbid subject of death. And the second important question is, the sages are going to have lots to say about what happens when a person dies, where the soul goes to, how we connect with the departed, and all of those sorts of issues. How do they know these things? How does the Talmud or the Midrash or the Kabbalah know what happens before or after terrestrial life? No human being's ever been there. No one's ever been able to come back and tell us what it was like. And there's no empirical proof for much of what the sages say. So I'm very much aware of the fact that there'll be some arch rationalists and empiricists among us who are going to be very dissatisfied because they want to know, how do you know it's true? Or do we know that this is all true? So those are the 2 questions that I wanted to pose right from the beginning and knock on the head before we start. Why are we devoting so much time to this topic? And how do we know that what's being told to us is true? So the answer to the first question is that this course is actually about how to live, not about how to die. the way in which we perceive death has a huge impact on the way in which we choose to live. If you believe that there's nothing beyond death, you may well choose a lifestyle, a different lifestyle to someone who believes in the eternity of the soul, or of reward and punishment, or of a purposeful life. So if you can see death in a different light, it may very well influence you in the way in which you see the rest of your life. It may change your psychological and mental state for the better, or it may even change the way in which you choose to spend the rest of your life. So in a somewhat perverse way, death helps us to define what kind of life we want to live. And the answer to the second question is that it's important to understand that the intention of this course is not to empirically prove the existence of the soul or any of the other soul facts that it asserts. This course addresses life and afterlife from a Jewish perspective, and we're simply presenting what Judaism has to say about these topics. You know, the mind alone cannot conclusively answer or determine any of these issues. But it's part of Jewish belief that God in his kindness gave us a behind-the-scenes glimpse in the Torah of what transpires in the spiritual realms. And you can buy it or not buy it. But it seems to me that even if you can't reconcile yourself to the idea that these truths were revealed in the Torah and to the sages, if you can accept the whole philosophical and emotional and practical framework that is being offered in this course, and if it leads you to a better quality of life and a better relationship with death, then that's got to be worthwhile in itself, even if you can't verify scientifically the premises upon which this whole edifice is based. So just to remind you again, these 6 sessions are all standalone, but each one of them adds another piece to the overall structure, like another piece in constructing a building, until hopefully by the time we get to the last week, we have an overarching, comprehensive edifice into which we can finally enter and feel safe. So you may have noticed that I'm experimenting tonight with incorporating slides in a rather technically complex setup of 3 computers linked by a magic box of electronic tricks in order to overcome Zoom's clunky screen sharing, which we all hate. So I ask your forbearance as I play with all this technology around me. If you would see my study where I'm sitting, you just see screens all over the place and wires all over the place. What you're going to see throughout the program tonight is you'll see the slides and me as the presenter, and we are spotlighted, and we will remain spotlighted throughout the session. But in the top right-hand corner of your screens, you can toggle between speaker view and gallery view. And when you click on gallery view, of course, you're going to see in the usual way everybody who's participating. So you can watch all the faces gasp or grimace as we go through the program. But when you switch back to speaker view, you're going to return to the slides and to the presenter screen, and you can move backwards and forwards between both, whatever suits you. And can I just suggest that while they're bound to be questions, can you just note them down or put them in the chat so we can deal with them at the end of tonight's session for those who want to stay a little bit later in order that we can go through, get through our material, because there's quite a lot of material to get through tonight. And I want to conclude my introductory remarks on a very personal note. I've had to question my own preparedness to engage in this course, beginning as it does within a few days of my own mother's first yahrzeit. Was I ready to give it? And I can tell you that there are certainly some very raw parts. And I will perfectly understand if some of you have joined will find that it's going to be hard to continue. But can I say that for me, it's a necessary journey. And although I am filled with trepidation at being able to do justice to the sensitive issues that we're going to deal with in the coming weeks, I'm very pleased to share this journey of the soul with my 2 sisters, one in America and one in Canada, and of course, with all of you. So let's get started with a video, the content of which encapsulates our first lesson.
Why wait to celebrate? Bright lights in city streets.
Eighth Day is a popular Hasidic rock band.
Why wait to celebrate?
One of their hits was inspired by a powerful episode in the life of the second leader of the Hasidic movement, Rabbi Dovber of Mezerich.
A student goes to visit a sage, and the sage has nothing in his house. And he says, "Where's your couches? Where's your chandelier?" And he says back to the student, "Where's all your stuff? You just have a suitcase." And the student responds, "But I'm just passing through." And that's when the sage says, "Aha, I'm just like you. I'm also just passing through."
To his student's assertion, Rabbi Dovber responded with a transformative insight.
That's when he said, I'm just like you. I'm just passing through, just like you. My heart wants to feel something that's real, and my mind hopes to find treasures of another kind. And if you had my eyes, you'd see a palace for you and me.
This world is temporary.
Where people spend most of their life collecting stuff. And the sage tells them, I'm actually just like you. I also collect stuff. It's just not that type of stuff. Not leather couches and chandeliers. I collect treasures of another kind.
You know, he stays focused on that higher goal.
Rabbi Dovber taught his students that this world's glitter is a distraction that expires when the journey of corporeality chugs to an abrupt end. Better to invest in treasures of a kind that will benefit the soul in its eternal destination.
I'm just like you. I'm just passing through, just like you. My heart wants to feel something that's real, and my mind hopes to find treasures of another kind. And if you had my eyes, you'd see a palace for you and me. And my heart wants to feel something that's real, and my mind hopes to find treasures of another kind. And if you had my eyes, you'd see a palace for you and me. A palace for you and me.
Well, let's see if we can find treasures of another kind. Our first lesson is going to focus on the Jewish perspective of how to overcome the fear of death. Let's start with our first text tonight. It's in your booklets on page 3, and it's text number 1. And as we did on the last occasion, we're just going to invite anybody who wants to pick it up and to read it, so that we have a sense of people participating with so many people joining the course. Anybody?
I'll go, Shlomo.
Thank you.
It's text number 1, page 3. Okay. A universal fear. Mortality has haunted us from the beginning of
Just by the way, just note that this is coming from Irvin D. Yalom. There's a little note about him at the bottom. He's a psychiatrist. He's emeritus professor of psychiatry at Stanford University. Sorry to interrupt you.
Thank you.
Carry on.
Mortality has haunted us from the beginning of history. 4,000 years ago, the Babylonian hero Gilgamesh reflected on the death of his friend Enkidu with the words, "Thou hast become dark and cannot hear me. When I die, shall I not be like Enkidu? Sorrow enters my heart, I'm afraid of death. Gilgamesh speaks for us all. As he feared death, so do we all, each and every man, woman, and child. For some of us, the fear of death manifests only indirectly, either as generalized unrest or masqueraded as another psychological symptom. Other individuals experience an explicit and conscious stream of anxiety about death. And for some of us, the fear of death erupts into terror that negates all happiness and fulfillment.
Thank you very much, Amy, and great to have you with us. And Mazal Tov on the Bar Mitzvah recently.
Thank you.
So the point that I made a little earlier, to the effect that the way in which we perceive death has an impact on the way in which we choose to live, appears to be supported by a psychological theory called the terror management theory. I hate all these kind of fancy names, but it was advanced by a group of social psychologists, and it posits that our awareness of death and our efforts to cope with this awareness are the impetus for a wide variety of seemingly unrelated human activities. And we have to add to that something really important, because we are, and I suspect one of the reasons why so many people have joined the course, for many people, COVID-19, the pandemic, has provided a perfect storm of fear and anxiety associated with death. In the face of a direct death threat that's posed by the coronavirus, underlying death fears have been brought to the fore. And additionally, the dearth of scientific knowledge about this novel virus, the lack of a cure for the disease, its swift nature, the way in which it passes from one person to another, triggers some of the biggest fears associated with death, the fear of the unknown and the fear of the abrupt halt to life. Let's turn to our second text, or rather not a text, but can you just take a look at on page 4, figure 1.1. Now, I don't know whether this holds true for the United Kingdom in terms of the percentages of death statistics, the numbers of people who are not afraid or don't know, etc. But you see, 11% of Americans are very afraid. Only 25%, a quarter, are not afraid at all. It seems that the majority of people somewhere on the spectrum are afraid in one form or another. And the question is, what feelings does the subject of death and mortality evoke in you? So we come now to the question of what is the Jewish perspective of death? In Jewish thought, death is not considered the end of life, but rather the beginning of a new phase of life and a new road to travel. It follows then that to understand what death is, we have to re-examine our definition of life. Because if death is simply a new phase of life, then clearly we're not understanding what life is, because our current definition of life, of death, current definition of life is that death is its end. So if we don't know who we are or what we are incapable of determining whether death is our beginning and middle or something else entirely. So we have to begin to understand who we are. Most times, you see, we actually don't even think about these matters. But when we encounter a crisis, such as an illness or the death of a loved one, as many of you will know, and as I know as well, you're suddenly forced to confront the question. Because it's at those moments when life just seems so fragile and so ephemeral and so very difficult to define. You know, you suddenly feel as if you're just a speck in the vastness of the universe, here for a moment and then gone. And it's those crisis moments in our lives that force us to confront the questions, who are we really? What's our life really all about? So a group of Hasidim once visited Reb Zusha of Anatolia, one of the great Hasidic rabbis, and they found him pacing up and down and asking the same question over and over again. Where is Zusha, he said. Where is Zusha? Really agitated. So the Hasidim thought maybe the guy's lost his mind. So they asked him, what are you doing? And he said to them, you know, one day I'm going to die. You will walk in and you'll find my body here on the floor. And I will be exactly as I am now. The same flesh, the same bones, the same countenance. So if my countenance and my appearance and my physical substance are not Zusha, then where is Zusha? And anybody who has had the great mysterious privilege of being alongside somebody when they have died, when their soul has expired, will understand exactly the question that he has asked. For one moment, the person is no longer there, despite the fact that the body is there and everything else seems to be exactly the same. And what's happened? It's so mysterious. What is that moment between life and death, with that last little breath of life when it disappears? One of our greatest Kabbalists, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the Arizal, the 15th century Kabbalist of Sfat, he didn't actually write anything himself. His teachings were recorded by his student, Rabbi Chaim Vital. But in our second text on page 5, text 2, he addresses this essential question. And if somebody would read it, please, I'd be very grateful. Someone else?
Read it if you want me to.
I'm happy to read it.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
Go for it.
Sorry, I didn't want to. The
Okay.
wise are aware that the human body is not the human being. When we speak of the human being, we are referring to the human's inner dimension. The body is merely a garment in which the soul is attired during its sojourn in this world.
So the body is just a case, and there's something else that fills it. So who is the real I? According to this text, I'm not a particular body part, such as the head or the heart or the brain. I'm not even the sum of all my body parts. And even more than that, I'm not my accumulated knowledge and intellect and emotions and feelings and fears and desires. The real I is the soul, which in Hebrew we call the neshama. In other words, the essence of who we are our neshamot, our souls, and our bodies are the garments of our true beings. You know, there are certain words and concepts that many of us pretend to understand. Let me give you some examples. The theory of relativity, electricity, the Big Bang theory. If any of these are mentioned in a conversation, we nod, you know, as if we pretend that we really understand what we're talking about. But actually, if we're honest, we have got no idea what these entities really are. And the truth of the matter is that soul is another one of those. Because as physical people with physical frames of reference, we just can't grasp really the picture, fully grasp what a soul is. As much as, just like a person who's born blind can't understand the concept of colors. But we can know some things about the neshama, because like electricity or relativity, We can feel its effects, even if we can't grasp its essence. As one sage put it very beautifully, we can't know what it is, but we can know that it is. In other words, we can feel that it's there, but we can't grasp its essence. Let's go back to the very beginning of the Bible, where we first learn about the existence of a neshama, of a soul. And this is on page 6 in text number 3a. If somebody would like to read it, please. It's very short.
God formed the human of soul from the earth and breathed into his nostrils a neshama, soul of life, and the human being became a living being.
So that transpired on the 6th day of creation. Earlier in the day, God created the animals. Here's a description in text 3b of that occurrence. Please continue reading.
God said, "Let the earth bring forth living beings of different species, cattle, creeping things, and beasts of the earth, according to their species." And it was so.
Okay. There we are. Those are the two texts. What is the difference between these two texts? Let me hear your views, please.
One, they mention the soul, and one they don't.
Good.
One is spiritual, and one is human or animal, of animal making.
Yes, Amy Hassel says that one doesn't have a neshama. Another thought?
It said that God formed the human, and the other one, the earth brought it forward. God didn't make it, the earth brought it forward.
Okay.
And with the human, God breathed into the human something from himself. The breath of God goes into the human, but nothing has gone into the animals.
While you're all very close, let's take a look at the next two slides. Man is fashioned in two parts. First, the hardware. That's the soil from the earth. And then there's the software. And that's the soul that's imported into the body. And this is in direct contrast with how animals came to be. Those animals are created with the life force already endowed. Human beings initially are no more than an inanimate form, molded from the earth. Only later, the life is breathed into them. Animals spring forth from the earth as fully living creatures, and that's the fundamental difference. And this might seem like an insignificant detail, but in fact, it's absolutely monumental, because this tells us something very important about the human soul. It doesn't necessarily share an existence with the body. The fates of body and soul are not necessarily intertwined. And most importantly, for the purpose of our discussion, just as a body and a soul weren't a single unit at their inception, they part ways later on as well, as the biblical commentator, the Chizkuni, notes in our text number 3c on page 7 on this verse. Somebody read it, please. It's a short one again. Okay, I'll read it. God did what he had not done with any other creature. He blew into Adam with his Holy Spirit a neshama that is immortal and does not perish when the body does.
Oh.
So, not only is the real I not the body, but the true self doesn't even need to inhabit the body. The true I is eternal. It's the source of the body's biochemistry, not a product of it. And while it inhabits the body for a while, it precedes it, and it continues to exist even after the body is gone. Put in different words, The body has no independent life. The soul does. The body doesn't really experience life. It just tags along for a certain time while it is inhabited by the soul. Of course, the body is also alive. It's infused with life. It's a living being, but it's not intrinsically alive. And at a certain juncture, the ride between the body and the soul comes to an end, for the body at any rate. If we can grasp this concept, we're ready to formulate the first two steps of our foundation tonight. Number one, the real me is my soul, not my body. Number two, the real me, the soul, is eternal. And so therefore, I am eternal.
Wow.
The two texts now that we're going to read now are going to reveal another important idea about the human soul. And by the way, as we read this piece, it's a midrash, and it's very helpful to remember that the midrash uses anthropomorphic terms using physical descriptions to depict spiritual concepts. So text number 4 on page 8 is quite a long one, and I'd like somebody to read it really nicely for us, because it's a wonderful text.
I'll read it.
Okay, fine. Sue.
Me?
Yeah, you.
40 days before the conception of a child, God summons the angel in charge of souls and tells him, "Bring before me a certain soul that is now in paradise. Its name is such and such, and its appearance is such and such. This is possible because all the souls that are born in this world were created on the day the world was created and exist until the end of time. The angel goes and brings the soul before God. The soul bows and prostrates itself before the Supreme King of Kings. God instructs the soul, please enter the seminal drop that is currently in the hands of the angel in charge of pregnancy. The soul protests, Master of the universe, I am quite satisfied with the world I inhabited since the day you created me. I am holy and pure, hewn from your throne of glory. Why do you wish to cause me to enter this putrid drop?"
Thank you, Susie. And please continue with text number 5, because it's going to add to this idea.
The world,
it's
the
on
world
page,
is
got
like,
it, okay.
sorry, page 10, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. This world is like a corridor before the world to come. Prepare yourself in the corridor so that you may enter the palace. A single moment of bliss in the world to come is greater than all of this world.
Thank you. So what attitude, I ask you, do these texts reveal about the soul's relationship with corporeality? What new idea has emerged from these two texts? Anyone? Discussion.
Soul doesn't particularly want a body, or possibly even more strong than that.
I think the soul doesn't want to come down to this low level.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Generally, it might be more important what happens to you when you die than when you live.
That's a very, very interesting comment, which we're going to come back to shortly.
It's a bit worrying.
Because, by the way, we're building a story here, okay? We're step by step. And we're not finished yet. We're just in the beginning. We're still on the lowest slopes of this mountain that we're going to climb tonight. Okay.
Shlomo, how does the soul know which body to choose, or
No, the Almighty makes a shidduch.
Yeah.
The soul is brought, and then he said, "This is the body. This is the pregnant woman. And put the seminal drop. I'm going to put them together." Here we are, putting them together.
Can I ask something? As a midwife, and because I've worked in gynecology a lot with women who've had terminations, we've always been led to believe that, if somebody has a termination, it's somehow not so serious if it's before the first trimester, you know, the first 3 months, that the soul somehow enters.
And the soul is not. The soul is there, but it's not a viable child for a period of time according to Jewish law. So, yeah. I'm hesitant to get too involved in answering that question. I will come back to it a little bit later on if you wish. So the theme of these texts is not only that the soul is not a physical being, but as Robin suggested, it's actually not very interested in the physical world either. While in heaven, it has no desire to come down into the world. So it seems that the soul actually has no need for a body, and the texts that we've just read seem to illustrate that. The soul is more content to lead a holy spiritual existence. In fact, it seems to be deeply perturbed by its descent into a body and into this world. When occupying the body, it's almost as if it's a stranger on foreign soil.
But perhaps it doesn't understand the
Hey,
lessons.
hold it, mate. Hold it, you're ahead of the game. The same holds true with regard to death. When that time arrives, the soul does not live out the rest of its eternal life in a useful fashion. Rather, the soul resumes its previous tranquil and idyllic spiritual state in an existence that seems to be far superior to the one that's here in this world. It's promoted, in the words of that text, from the corridor to the palace.
Sorry.
Hold it. In different words, the sojourn into this physical world seems to be almost incidental to the soul's spiritual reality. And this, therefore, is going to lead us to one more principle in our formulation, as you'll see in text figure number 1.4 on page 10. And we'll illustrate this with our slides. That's our principle number 1. That's our principle number 2. And here comes principle number 3 that we've just discovered. Okay, let's hold that for the moment. There's a huge problem with what we've just learned. Just in case you've all bought into it and said, yes, 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 I agree with all of that. Well, I'm really sorry, but we have a problem. The problem is that if you adopt that kind of view that we've just developed over here, through texts, of course, you could take a very flippant and nonchalant approach to death.
Life.
Yeah, why should we be perturbed about the demise of the physical body if the soul, the real me, is going to continue on to a better and a greater place? If you're going to take these texts at face value, the soul was never keen to be here in the first place. So why should we be overly bothered when the time comes for its unwanted stay here at the end? And as a matter of fact, there are some religions that, as you probably know, don't place very much value on life in this world.
Yes.
The 16th century sage, known as the Radvaz, was a first-hand observer of Muslim culture in 16th century Morocco and Egypt. And he testified as follows, quote, "I have personally observed that the Ishmaelites disproportionately oppose displays of mourning to the extent of forbidding the rending of garments in grief due to their belief in the eternity of the soul." But as you know, that is not the Jewish perspective. In the Jewish view, life here in this world is paramount, and death is seen as a tragedy. There's no greater mitzvah than saving a life, and we're enjoined in the Torah to be exceedingly careful in safeguarding the health of the body. You're not even allowed to do dangerous things, like walking to shul on Shabbat or something like that. You've got to look after your body. And most of our community take heed of that, and they preferred to come by car, which is a lot safer.
Or go to Zoom.
In fact, according to Jewish law, as we'll see from this reading of Maimonides' Code of Jewish Law, preserving life takes precedence over nearly every mitzvah. And this is on page 12, and it's text number 6. And someone to read it, please.
I will.
Thank you.
If a non-Jew attempts to force a Jew, to violate one of the Torah's commandments at the pain of death, the Jew should violate the commandment rather than be killed, because the Torah states concerning mitzvot, a person shall do them and live by them. One should live by them and not die because of them.
And that is why life takes precedence over every mitzvah, even when a person is on his deathbed and there's no natural hope for their recovery. Even at that stage, we do everything possible, including desecrating Shabbat, in order, as you know, as Jews, to lengthen this person's life, even if it's for a few minutes, for a few moments. Every moment of life is precious. So to further confuse the matter, let's go back again and look at, we were a little bit unfair when we showed you texts 4 and 5, because we didn't show you the whole text. So let's go back to those texts that we read earlier, the ones that demonstrate the superiority of the afterlife. And first of all, in text number 7 on page 13, let's read God's response to the soul when it registered its protest about being sent into this world. Someone to read it, please.
God hurries to reassure the descending soul. The world to which I am bringing you will prove more beneficial than the one you presently inhabit. Indeed, I formed you exclusively for the purpose of creating mortal life from this particular drop of seed. With that, God forcibly installs the soul.
God forcibly installs the soul. And as for that second mission that speaks about the superiority of even 1 hour of the world to come over the eternity of this world and all of its pleasures, that statement is preceded, completely unqualified, by the following one in text number 8 on page 13. Please continue reading.
A single moment of repentance and of good deeds in this world is greater than all of the world to come.
Thank you. And that's what you just said. So we are left with 2 completely contradictory narratives that we've built up now. The first one emphasizes the value of eternal spiritual life over bodily life. The second one emphasizes the value of bodily life over spiritual life. Hey, we've got to be Jewish to come up with problems of this kind. Yeah. How are we going to reconcile the contradiction? That's the big question for tonight. And the answer is we have to actually move to a much more nuanced understanding of souls. Yes, it's true that the soul is a divine spiritual entity, more naturally at home in the spiritual realms and in the presence of God. But the whole purpose of a soul, the reason for its creation, is in order to inhabit a body, to be present in the physical world for reasons that we're going to explain in a later session. In fact, not only is the time that the soul spends in the world the reason for its creation, it's the reason for all creation. And this idea is expressed in the following Talmudic text, which I have to admit sounds somewhat philocentric. It's text number 9 on page 14. It's very short. I'll read it. God created the universe on a condition. If the Jews accept the Torah, he told the universe, you will continue to exist. If they do not, I will return you to nothingness. I only created the world in order for there to be souls in it. Otherwise, why do I need it? With all of its aggravation. So God didn't create the universe because he desired paradise or because he desired the afterlife. But what he really desired were human beings who are going to live holy and ethical lives in this physical world. People are going to struggle to overcome the difficulties and the obstacles and the challenges and the pain and the joy and all the stuff of life, the stuff which goes on in the course of all of our lives. And if we don't accept this task, this text says, there's no further purpose for God in having a world. And so therefore the soul is caught between two conflicting states. On the one hand, the comfortable place for it to be is in the spiritual realms. When it senses the challenges that awaits it in its physical embodiment, it resists being born. I don't want to go down over there. I'm scared to go down over there. They have to go through all of that stuff in the world. They have to go through all of, I can't believe it, bring up kids and all the bereavement and pain and everything else. Why do I have to go through all of that? And the soul senses that. And yet it also senses at the same time that being born in a body is the whole purpose of its existence. And so it enters the world with a tremendous sense of trepidation. And then once it's here, it's reluctant to leave. And this central idea that the whole purpose of the soul is to be in the world is the reason why in Judaism there's nothing more important than life. We value life here in this world because here is where it's at. This is the main show. This is where the soul accomplishes. This is where we accomplish. So in a nutshell, 1 hour in this world is more important than all of the next, and 1 hour in the next world is more pleasurable than all of this one. And this tension is exquisitely captured in a very pithy statement from Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of Our Fathers, on page 15 in text number 10. I'm going to read it in Hebrew and then read it in Hebrew, in English. She'al korchecha ta notzar, ve'al korchecha ta nolad, ve'al korchecha ta chai, ve'al korchecha ata met. Against your will, you were formed, and against your will, you were born. Against your will, you live, and against your will, you will die. And when you read this text, it sounds like an oxymoron. If the fact that we live is against our soul's will, why would our death also be against its will? Do our souls want to be in our bodies, or don't they? Make up your mind. Maybe they change their minds midway. But based on what we've explained, we can understand that in fact both are true. The divine soul has mixed feelings about descent into the physical world. On the one hand, it's scary, it's so foreign. On the other hand, it's exciting and exhilarating. This is the moment of truth, the reason why it was created. It's the best and most important thing that could happen to it. So when in heaven the soul is reluctant to leave paradise, against your will you live. When on earth, it's then reluctant to leave the place where it is making a difference. Against your will, you die. So Judaism teaches that God created the universe because he found a certain delight in directing this incredible divine dichotomy. Against your will, you're born. Against your will, you will die. The next world is more pleasurable. But hey, bread is the staff of life. This world is more important. Okay, let's come back to the subject of the fear of death. One of the ways in which many people contend with the fear of death is by trying to make a difference in the world while we are alive, so that even after we're gone, when we cease to exist, our legacy and our memory will continue to live. Isn't that what we all do? And in this way, we are seeking immortality. Well, making a difference in the world is definitely a good thing to be doing. It's a very noble aspiration. But I wonder for how many generations we're going to remain in the minds of those who come after us. Our kids? Yep, hope so. Grandchildren? I'd like to tick that box. I'd like to live long enough to be able to tick the box and hope that I'll be remembered by my great-grandchildren fondly. They'll talk about Zadie and say, remember the funny things that he did. But in 4 generations or 5 generations or 6 generations, who the heck is going to remember me? Just going to be a name, Rabbi Levine, Shlomo Levine, Southampton Synagogue. It means nothing to anybody. To be a name on a plaque somewhere, on a wall. So where's the immortality? Maybe if you're a very, very famous person, you can do incredible things and people will know you for generations. They'll bless you for generations. You know, they are famous people. We use their names all the time. Then they invented this or they invented that, and we know about them. But for most of us, we don't get immortality. You know that. So is there another way, therefore, to get immortality? If immortality is what we're seeking. So there's another approach, a Jewish approach, to dealing with the fear of death that I think is different. In the Jewish way of thinking, we don't just strive to remain alive artificially or metaphorically, only in the minds or the hearts of others. Instead, what we strive to do is to live a life that is able to face death with equanimity, knowing both what life is now and beyond. We have to develop a sense in which the time that our souls reside in our bodies is a kind of uninterrupted continuum of what came before and what's going to come afterwards. This is illustrated in a diary entry of the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak Schneerson, after his imprisonment by the Soviets for continuing to promote Jewish observance. And it's text number 11 on page 16, with a reader, please.
Arrived for interrogation at the offices of the Soviet GPU. However, in keeping with my principles, I was not very cooperative. One of the interrogators raised a revolver, sat on the desk before him. He looked me in the eye and mockingly said, "This small toy has incredible powers. It causes principles to melt away. It opens mouths. Under its spell, even mutes have become talkative." I responded, "You are quite mistaken. That toy only has an effect on faint-hearted non-believers, those with one world and multiple gods. We, on the other hand, have only one God and 2 worlds. And as such, I don't panic at the sight of your toy. It has no effect on me whatsoever."
Well, of course, the Rebbe wanted to live and to continue his mission here in the world. But at the same time, it's clear that he didn't find the prospect of death very frightening. He was able to face it with complete equanimity, serenity of mind, and that was because of the quality of life that he led in this world. To understand this more deeply, we need to turn to a very curious Talmudic passage that asserts that righteous people don't die. It's text number 13 on page 18. It's very short. After their demise, tzaddikim, that is to say righteous people, are referred to as being alive. Go and figure that one out. Well, let's figure it out this way. Every person consists of a body and a soul. The body eventually fades and returns to dust while the immortal soul lives on for eternity. But what about all the things with which a person is identified? His or her feelings, their thoughts, behaviors, dreams, aspirations. Are these part of the eternal soul that lives forever? Or are they part of the mortal body that dies? If the person was concerned in their life with purely earthly and bodily needs, the things which die with the body, it follows that for the person who prioritized the desires and aspirations of body, money, physical luxuries, pleasures, honor, fame, etc., all the stuff you saw in that lovely video that we started with, then the reality is that physical demise actually does bring life to a crashing halt, because none of that stuff is going to remain. The person's entire life focus has gone forever. But if, on the other hand, the part of the person that identified with the eternal soul, if the focus is on spiritual life and on a relationship with God, that's the part which doesn't die. A non-materialistic person merely moves to a different dimension where, unencumbered by physical needs and distractions and constraints, he or she is free to continue something which they started in their life, the pursuit of a spiritual life. Everything that the person has lived for continues on. Precious little of anything changes at all. All of the person's values and aspirations and priorities continue on, and actually even to an even greater measure in the next stage. And that's the kind of life that the Rebbe in our story lived. And that's why he wasn't afraid of his death. And that's why we refer to the death of tzaddikim as being alive, because their whole lives are soul lives, not body lives. So, in summary, if death scares us because we naturally perceive it as the end, then we should contemplate the eternality of the soul. If the end frightens us, do fewer things in your life that end and more things that are eternal. Now, I want to tell you, it's not an all or nothing proposition. Let's be honest. It's not that I live a spiritual, immortal life with the ability to unflinchingly look at death in the eye, or that, on the other hand, I'm a materialistic, mortal person who's terrified by the crashing halt that death is going to bring to all the things that I enjoy in this life. The reality is that we are all of us on a mortality spectrum. The only question is, and this is the question with which I leave you tonight, is in which direction am I moving on that spectrum? Next week, we're going to look at the experience of the soul's departure from the body and the aftermath from the soul's perspective. And then we'll answer the question as well, once it has ascended on high, what is the nature of the soul's connection with its loved ones and the life that it has left behind? And please do take a look at the note to self in your books, in which you are invited to note down what you have taken from tonight's session and do some additional reading in the extensive appendix. I'm hoping to be able to send out tomorrow a link to tonight's recording for anybody who wants to come back to it and look over various parts if you wish. And we're going to end, before we come to our questions, with a video. And I apologize for the fact that it is very Americanized, but it sums up everything which we have learned tonight. Those of you who are American will love it, and those of you who are English will hate it.
Lesson 1. Demystifying Death. 1. The awareness of our mortality and the resulting natural fear of death influence many elements of our psyche, behavior, and life choices. Our perspective on death influences multiple areas of our lives. 2. The neshama, human soul, the true essence of the human being, is eternal. It precedes the body and continues to exist after the body is gone. While still in heaven, it does not desire to descend into a body. And when the time of death arrives, it resumes its native spiritual state. 3. The fact that the briefest spiritual experience of the next world is more pleasurable than all of this world does not diminish the reality that even a brief stay in this world is more important than all of the next. Therefore, Jewish law gives precedence to preserving life over nearly every mitzvah. 4. This perspective allows us to appreciate and value life without fear of death. 5. While our corporeal needs and endeavors die with the body, our soul-focused aspirations and actions live on eternally. Thus, when we live and identify with eternal values, our current life continues even after the body's demise.
Okay, let's have your questions. We've finished our session for tonight. I hope that you found it helpful and useful. If you'd like to have some discussion now, there's lots of chats and you can ask and we can talk for a while. Nobody's obligated to stay any longer. Everybody's here. And you let me know, by the way, whether you like to have the slides, whether you think that they are an advantage or not an advantage. Some people find that slides get in the way. I'd be very interested to have your feedback. All right.
Can I ask a question? Yeah.
Yeah, Robin.
Are you suggesting that the soul comes back here?
Something Rabbi Shlomo.
Hang on a second. Just remain. Best if everybody else remains muted for the moment. Robin.
In order to spend time in a body, at which place it is the only place that learning can transpire, and that is done through the study of the Torah. In other words, it's getting closer to Hashem. On the other side, if it's that pleasurable and you can grow spiritually, then why come down here? So what you're really suggesting, there is no growth on the other side, but only pleasure. And if you're able then to maximize the time in a body, you will start off presumably at a different place from the place that you came down from.
Yeah. So it's not about learning Torah in this world, etc. It's about what you do. It's about what kind of human being you become, what kind of Jew you become, how you lead your life, how you impact upon the world around you, whether you leave the world in a better or worse state than it was before your soul came down into your body and you were born and you lived your life and you did all the stuff that went on in your life. So it's not so much about the study. The study that we have over here is only in order to do and to perform. It's a world of action. Study leads to action, and that's why you need to study to know how to act and what to act. I think you were asking about whether souls come back again. We're going to deal with that. There is, as I mentioned, one of our sessions is going to deal with what happens if you don't get it all done the first time round. You know, do you get a second chance? Do you come back again? Is there another opportunity, etc., etc.? All of that we'll deal with that. It'd be nice to know that there are second chances in life, as in fact in death. But yes, Robin, the business is down over here for all of its difficulty and its pain. This is where we need to be. This is the place where we make a difference, although it's a lot more pleasurable for the soul, because the soul is part of God. It basks in the presence of God in its disembodied state, and it's a much nicer place for it to be, but it's not where it's meant to be.
Okay.
Next.
Sorry, can I ask a quick question?
Please.
Who owns the soul?
God.
Do we own the soul, or does God own the soul, or can you give your soul away to someone else?
God loans it to us.
Okay.
It's on loan.
So it's Hashem owns the soul.
Because it's actually part of God. Our souls are part of God.
We can't give it to somebody else.
You can't give it to someone else, no. He's
That's
only loaned it to you. That's what makes you special.
Can't give it away.
You know that there are, how many billions of people in the world today? I think it's more than
7 billion.
7 billion? You know, there's only one of you. You're a one-off.
Can I take that one
Your
question?
soul and your body is absolutely spectacular, and nobody else can have it.
Who, Shlomo, who owns the body?
Well, that is very interesting, because we're going to be dealing with the issues of what you can do with your body and whether you are an owner of it or not. So we're going to defer the answer to that question to one of our later sessions, Mike.
But when the soul goes, what is more important, the soul or the body? Because when the body goes, we give it a lot of, when it comes to burying the body, we give it a lot of...
give it a lot of cover, don't we? We treat it
yes.
very nicely.
Yes.
And we're going to deal with that next week, or the week after. Why is it, if the body is just a body, why are we treating it so nicely?
Can I ask you something, Rabbi Shlomo?
Pardon?
Sorry, could I ask you a question?
Please.
Because I sort of don't think I'll sleep tonight unless I can understand this a bit better, actually. Because I'm just wondering if all souls are born equal, or are they different aspects of Hashem? So what is the intelligence and the personality of each soul? Are they different just as we are? Or is it just see what happens once you're born? You'll start kind of with the same...
Every soul consists of 10 parts, the 10 soul powers, the 10 soul energies. Chokhmah, Bina, Da'at, and the 7 emotional, love, fear, etc. It has all those capacities, but each one is given its own special flavor. Each one is given its own special talents. Every human being is born with their own unique talents. And some people, you know, Esther, some people know from a very early stage what they are about, who they are, what they're made for, what they're going to do, what their life is. Others, lots of us, me included, spend a long time in our lives trying to figure out who we are and what our task is and what we should be doing. But it's a journey of self-discovery as you begin to uncover the special faculties that have been implanted in every one of us, which makes every one of us so amazingly different, which creates the diversity of the world, which makes one person an architect and another person an artist and another person a therapist and another person, God forbid, a rabbi or rebbitzin or something terrible like that, you know. it takes you till you discover who you are and what you're meant for and what you're supposed to do and where your gifts are and how to make. By the way, if you want to know where your real gifts are, very often it's about the things which you don't want to do. That's where you'll discover your gifts.
Yeah.
The things which are hardest.
Shlomo, on that point, so is it a case, as you say, of discovering what your neshama, what your soul is, or can the soul evolve and grow and develop?
Yes, of course. The soul doesn't change, but it becomes more revealed. It
Right.
reveals itself in the course of life.
I see.
Can I ask a few questions?
Pamela.
A few questions. One in relation to what you've just said. Can we surely not deny the influence the environment has upon what one does in life?
Yes, of
So
course.
the soul must change, I would have thought, according to the environment.
Well, look, there are lots of things which we don't choose in our life. There are lots of things which we can choose. And particularly if we're fortunate enough to live in the West, in liberal democracies, in free countries, like America once again is, as of a couple of hours ago, and as England is, and other places. There are lots of things which we can choose, but there are lots of things which you can't choose. You don't choose who your parents are, although lots of people would like to. You don't choose where you're born, your home, the environment in which you grow up, the country in which you are born. All of that is deliberate. When the soul is placed in the body, it is placed to do a particular job in a particular place, to face particular challenges, to have to engage with that environment and to be able to prevail, even in the most difficult of environments. Look, let's be clear. Most of us who are sharing tonight did not live through the Second World War and the Holocaust. You know, we missed it by just a few years. It's the blink of an eye in terms of eternity. There but for the grace of God go I. So why was one person born in that terrible, terrible age and another one just a few years later and escape it? We've grown up in our lives effectively in this country without any wars. Incredible. But we've had other challenges. The challenges of materialism, the challenges of a very sophisticated world around us. Every human being, every soul is put into a body in its own specific place to do what it needs uniquely to do. And everything is measured.
Thank you. My second question was as to the timing. Sorry. The timing of if the soul stays on longer.
The timing of what?
Whether the soul might remain longer than the body.
Well, we're going to have to deal with some very difficult issues like souls don't spend very much time in the world.
And my third question.
Hang on a second, I'm not finished yet.
Oh,
souls that leave to our minds too early. Children who die, spouses who die much too young. Has the soul really fulfilled its task, or has it been cut off in mid-flow? We're going to have to look at that in one of our sessions, and we will try and answer some of these difficult questions. What's your third question, Pamela?
Well, the third question is somewhat related, and the reason I asked the last question was because after my father passed away, I read quite a little bit about afterlife and whatever, and someone said, well, maybe the soul is still here waiting. The third question was, you hear about the time.
Let me just stop you for a moment over there. What we're going to learn next week is that some part of the soul indeed does remain here. And we'll find out how and how we can connect with it. And that's very important for us. to know that there is that connection.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm
I'm
glad.
giving you a last chance for another question before we move on to
Last one was this.
coming back, Amy.
Sorry. I mean,
sorry.
I was just wondering, Shlomo, if where does the kind of Jewish thought lie if, for example, a baby is a stillborn or dies in the mother's womb? Is the soul entered the baby? Is the soul born?
You know, I wish I knew. You're asking me. You all ask me questions as if you believe that I actually have the answers, and I'm winging it here, winging it.
Okay.
You're winging it very well.
I'll do some research.
I would like to know that when my mother passed away, she put her arms out and said, "Quickly, quickly." And I never know if she was talking to us or somebody on this tunnel, because I've heard other people tell me the same thing.
And you want me to answer that question?
I've always wondered who was my mother talking to. When
Pamela, shall I tell you something? There are some questions for which we will never know the answers.
No, but there are a few people who've had the same experience.
Well, there is a whole business about out of body experience. And in my notes here, there's a whole section on it about whether it's believed or not believed. Do Jews believe in out of body, that people sort of go up over there and they can see what's going on. There's a lot of psychological stuff about it as well. But I think that by and large, our answer is that we're not great believers in the out of body experience. It's more, that's considered to be more of a psychological state of the mind rather than a real experience of having gone up over there, having had a look around. You know, there's the story of the two golfers who played golf with each other every week, and they had this constant discussion about whether there's golf in the world to come, and they made a pact, and the pact was that the first one to go would come back and tell the other one whether there was golf or not. And one of the partners passed away, and the very next night, after he passed away, his remaining partner had this incredible dream. It was so real. It was absolutely like it was really happening. And he sees his friend, and his friend said, "Just as I promised, I'm coming back to you with the answer. I have got good news for you and bad news. The good news is, yes, there is golf in the world to come. The bad news is you're teeing off next."
Oh, great. That's great.
Shlomo.
Yes.
I remember that one.
I don't know if you remember, day or 2 days before my mother passed, when you came up to the hospital and did the prayer.
Yes.
And she hadn't been awake for days, right?
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, later that day, she woke up and said, "Shlomo's here. Am I now in heaven?" And that blew my, I couldn't believe it. It was like,
you know, you told that story so nicely, but what I know what she really said. She said, "Shlomo was here. Am I really in hell?" But you've just changed it. By the way, and we will come to this as well. We're going to talk about etiquette with people who are very ill and people who are dying, etc., and what you can say, what you can't say. But you probably know that when you're dealing, I'll tell you a story. One of our members, on one Rosh Hashanah, was had a very severe heart attack, and he was unconscious in a deep place, where everybody believed he couldn't be reached. And I decided that I would go and blow the shofar for him. So I went to the hospital, and his wife was at the bedside, and she said to me, "Please, I don't want you to blow the shofar because, first of all, it's a hospital. You're going to make a big, disturb other patients. Second of all, I don't want, he can't hear you, but I just don't want any sort of likelihood of agitation or anything else." So, of course, I listened to her, etc. Amazingly and miraculously, he recovered. And he told me that he was lying there when I visited, and he heard everything I was saying to him. And he knew that it was me, Shlomo, had come to visit him. And he's thinking, and I'm saying to him, today is Rosh Hashanah. I wish you a speedy recovery. You should have a good year. And he's lying there, he's thinking, why the hell isn't he blowing the shofar? So people here.
Yeah, that's incredible.
No, I can vouch for that, because it happened that my father, one of my nephew's weddings, collapsed on the dance floor and was completely unconscious, and we were all panicking around him, and I was, Daddy, are you all right? And calling him and get an ambulance and someone come. And do you know, he survived, and Hatzola came and took him in the ambulance, and he told me afterwards he heard every word that I was saying. I said, well, why didn't you answer me? You know, he's lying there, not saying a word. So they do say the last thing to go is the hearing. Actually. Yeah.
All right, everyone, we've kept you for more than long enough. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Shlomo.